very much for your informative talk. What do you think of Steve Bannon's recent foray into the debate in his interview at Four Corners, where Steve Bannon talked about Australia, as you say, being the canary in the coal mine, that we are joined at the hip with America, fighting a good battle against China as a mercantile totalitarian regime, that with China determined to transform America and Australia into vassal states, tributary states, and his prediction that there will be a populist revolution in Australia like there has been in America over the China issue.
I think this was an interview he did with Lisa.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
He couldn't stop him talking. Yes. He's got verbal diarrhea. He's almost like Alan Jones. And a lot of what he said is bullshit.
Yeah.
So I won't go into all the detail, but this is the American arrogance to say to us, to lecture us about what we should be doing vis-a-vis China. Harry Harris, the former American admiral, who's now, thank God, ambassador for America in Korea, instead of coming to Australia, has done the same thing. They all do. They say to us, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And unfortunately, we've got a government that's so mesmerised, and we've got a military that's so integrated into the United States military forces. We have a ship in the 7th Fleet, we did. The number 2 commander of the American Army in the Pacific is an Australian. Joint military exercises all the time, Marines in Darwin, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be very hard to decide what to do. It's every Australian politician's nightmare, but can I just say, on Steve Bannon, forget him. I mean, he's a blowhard and I don't think he's got much currency.
Do you think the Australian political class has the internal fortitude to separate ourselves from the American alliance and to an independent?
I've been saying that. No. Okay, next question, John.
Well, I normally talk about nuclear weapons, but this has got nothing to do with nukes. In 200 BC or thereabouts, the Chinese...
I don't want to lecture.
let me try and... The Chinese had a highly successful peasant revolt which set up their most successful dynasty, the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty ruled from the Chinese capital to the shores of the Caspian, along which stretched the Belt and Road, or should I say the Silk Road. At the other end of the Belt and Road was the then Roman Empire. Now, the Chinese manufactured lots and lots of things which the Romans needed. The Romans didn't manufacture anything that the Chinese needed. And the Roman Empire largely went bankrupt to the Chinese. Is history perhaps repeating itself?
Who knows, John, who knows? I can't really answer that. I'm not that kind of historian, but thank you very much. It's a very interesting analogy you make.
One of the 2 speakers, I think it was Arthur, was recounting how the Roman Empire, post the days of the legions, Roman legions, I presume, had mercenary forces manning the outposts of the empire, and it was from not being able to economically afford those outposts anymore that the whole house of cards started to collapse for the Romans. Now, extrapolate that to what's happening now with the American occupation forces in parts of its de facto empire. Afghanistan, I'll point to. It's been in the paper just this week how the entrepreneur of all things military, the head of Blackwater, I've forgotten his name, is proposing to the American government that they can withdraw their forces from Afghanistan and he will take over. Now, if that situation were to happen, either there or in Afghanistan or somewhere else, where the American economy has been so depleted by waging these wars, what are the dangers to the world if that were to happen from having a privatised theatre of war as opposed to a directly controlled theatre of war?
Dangers are incalculable on two levels. One is the introduction of drones and war by automation, which has no conscience. And the other is privatisation of American forces, as you say, correctly. They're beginning to contemplate privatising, bringing private troops to handle Afghanistan. They already have done it for a long time. You're right, the Americans have a huge number of bases. They're in what I'd call imperial overstretch, much more than the Romans ever did. But then the Romans were restricted to a pre-Christ world where they didn't have the transport that the Americans had. So yeah, it's overstretched. The American military are getting tired. The American Navy has had lots of problems and accidents, and it's a sign of fatigue on their part. I wouldn't be surprised to see that the American vaunted power is quite hollow, but I don't want to see that tested in a conflict with China. That would be absolutely disastrous. Thank you.
My name is Chandran. You did mention about the ex-foreign minister, Julie Bishop's talk, where she mentioned, I think 15 times or something about rule-based, etc. Euphemism for American established rule-based. Now, I just want to refer to a recent talk she gave in Perth, I believe, where she seems to have said that in decades to come, this region will be dominated by some of the countries in this region. And if I'm right, she mentioned China and India. So do you think that she has become a bit wiser after leaving the cabinet? Or has she got some sort of a nirvana once she's out of Canberra? Your comments, please.
My comment on Julie Bishop. She is the most personable and, I could say, attractive foreign minister. She certainly beats most other countries in terms of the way she conducts herself. She has a tremendous capacity for work, very hardworking, very conscientious. Comes from a good girls' school in Adelaide, which I know well. I used to take girls up from there. But she's got, I think, a not very sophisticated grasp of foreign policy. She's made mistakes giving moral lectures to the Chinese, too much kowtowing to American foreign policy, but she's done a few good things as well. Now she's resigned at a very tactical time. She's keeping her powder dry. I think she probably has pretensions to being the next Prime Minister. I think almost anyone would be better than Hooray Henry Morrison. But let's just wait and see. I have a sneaking respect for her. For a start, she decided to travel business class, not first class, going overseas when she first became Prime Minister. She's done a few good things, but they're fairly cosmetic. She's part of the pack. She's a conservative. Unfortunately, she's not a revolutionary. She's not going to change the way of thinking. If we want to change the way Canberra thinks, she's not the person to have in the vanguard.
First, thank you for your talk. I have two comments that I'd like you to respond to. The first is, I think that it's an utter mistake to demonize Israel, Iraq, and China as an enemy in order to establish peace, because who it really benefits is a military-industrial financial complex and a neoliberal, neoconservative economic framework. It's my first comment. My second comment, which I'd also like you to respond, is I think what challenges the United States and Australia is to become proofs of concept of a real, honest-to-goodness working democracy based on a diversity of peoples and cultures, and without any xenophobia, and only open, welcome, and encouraging engagement with the world. That's my
They're very idealistic, sir. On your second point first, I don't believe that democracy is going to continue to be necessarily the way most nations are going to conduct their affairs. I believe we're entering an age where autocracy is going to take over, led by China. Look at the countries of Asia. There isn't, hard to find one democratic country in the whole of Southeast Asia or Asia.
Philippines.
With Duterte as their leader? Come on.
Yes, yes. I am from Mindanao.
Okay, very good.
I am from Mindanao.
That's good to hear. Anyway, yeah, I'd say superficially the Philippines, but hardly any other. I would like to, I think our system is good. I think we're a working democracy in this country and we should continue to be so. But I worry about the stresses and strains of illegal migrants, of the flood of refugees going into Europe, the swing to the right on the part of countries like Poland. That's hardly democratic anymore. And it seems to me that we're entering a new, rather dark age where Enlightenment, Jeffersonian democracy is not necessarily going to rule, and where the United States is showing, through what Arthur said earlier in his comments, is a country that's verging on being broken. So it's very, very difficult to see where we go from here. But I hasten to say that, as far as I'm concerned, Australia should remain a democracy, of course.
Thanks very much, Richard. Jim's my name. Actually, I should start with a plug, which I've got to hand to the chair. The final frontier of US foreign policy is being exposed. Tomorrow night there's a film night at the Edmund Rice Centre in 15 Henley Road, Honolulu Bush, called No Space Force, and it's actually about exposing President Trump's idea of setting up a military space force in space, which seems like the final frontier.
They've already got one. They don't need another one.
They have one, but this is going to carry it on even to more absurd. But my main point is just to say, you know, war is the extension of politics by other means. Now, to me, what is happening with the United States is that we are having a total breakdown of the United States society. And if we're going to look at the foreign policy of the US, where is that going to happen? We are on this verge of a civil war in the United States. And I think that if we're going to make analogies with Rome, we have to look at the end of the Roman Empire, where you had Caligula, who made his horse a senator, and we had Nero, and we had lunatics. This is what happens with empires. When they're reaching the end of their tether, we start to get extremely crazy people being made the leaders, and it leads to chaos. And I think it's going to be chaos at home and chaos abroad. So I just wonder what you think about that. I think,
Jim, is it?
yeah.
Jim, I disagree with you, I'm afraid. I think that the United States has got some very bad social phenomena, and they're growing. I think that the Rust Belt of Midwest that supports Trump is irrational and very angry about the fact that their standards of living has fallen. But let's remember that there are checks and balances in that very complex society that continue to work. I've got friends in the State Department, we're all retired now, but they're Democrats, they're patriots, they're people who uphold the most compelling ideals of the American vision, the city on the hill. I wouldn't wipe them off yet, they've got a long way to go, but still...
It's a civil war.
Well, there was a civil war in 1860, which was much more bloody than anything they've had ever since. Come on, let's be realistic about this. But I still agree. My point is, the United States continues to have an unalloyed sense of its own destiny as the only superpower. It's for Australia to distance itself from that. We can't help being culturally, linguistically, historically connected with the Americans in many ways, but we also have to realise that under Trump they could drift out of control. And we have to have a much more intelligent, distant relationship, at least at the military and political level, than we do now.
My name is John.
John.
My prognosis, I don't know whether you'll agree, is quite grim. I heard Peter Bagues at one of those strategic forums, and his message to the US is you cannot be number one and still be number two economically. So his message is you have to stop China before China catches up with you. And I think the strategic thinkers in the US agree with him. So somehow or other China has to be stopped.
And how would you do that?
And that could happen in South China Sea. It could the fuse point.
Yeah.
Or it could be North Korea. It probably would be conventional warfare. And it's not difficult to create situations which would lead to conventional warfare. I think China understands that. So that's why it's in alliance with Russia. So I think in short time, you'll see Russian ships in South China Sea, and you see a face-off of conventional forces. And I don't think there's any way around some kind of conventional warfare.
Well, that's a very pessimistic view of yours, John, and I have to profoundly disagree with you. I've spent 30 years in the Foreign Service on behalf of my country trying to help prevent that sort of confrontation. And there are a lot of people like me. And the worst thing that could happen would be a military confrontation with China. That won't stop them. And to suggest that there should be some kind of attack on Korea, that's going to be absolutely disastrous for both the people in North Korea and the people in South Korea. So let me finish. This is not a debate, I'm just giving you my response. And I've always dedicated myself to the belief that we have to work things out peacefully. And I think they can be, despite the irascibility and the ignorance and the eccentricity of the President of the United States.
Good luck.
May I just...
Well, very quickly, we don't have much longer.
Does Donald Trump have real control over the military?
He thinks he does, but I don't think he does. It's been said that in the White House, some of his staff take papers off his desk before he can get at them to make a decision about them. And there's a good deal of control behind the scenes, but the only guy I'd put any faith in is Jim Mattis, the Minister for Defence. I think he's a wise old saw who shares the view of very many military that we don't want a war, we want to try and keep away from it. A lot of people think that. Anyway, thank you very much for your perspective. I hope it's in
Why
good.
did Nikki Haley resign?
That's very interesting. Before you go, sir, Nikki Haley showed the complete hypocrisy of American foreign policy when she said in the Security Council recently that Syria had a germ warfare attack, a chemical warfare attack against Doha. I think Doha, is that right? And she was completely forgetting that it was the Americans who supplied the precursors for chemicals used by Iraq in the 8-year war against Iran, when many young men were sent to the Western Front by the Iranian government. On the way they were asked to put their hand in a jar and bring out a key, which they put around their neck. That was the key to heaven once they became martyrs. When I was in Tehran in April, there's nothing more sobering and pathetic and very, very saddening to go to the Hall of Martyrs and see where all these young men were killed. That's the thing the Americans do. They don't remember the perfidies that they have committed. It's only the things that do as we say, not as we do. So anyway, good luck to her. I don't know what's going to happen to her, but we wait to see. Yeah, that's right.
Revolving door.
Final question, sir.
Oh, no, just me.
Okay.
One country which hasn't been mentioned until a very brief mention by the previous questioner is Russia. So how do you see US-Russia relations proceeding, particularly in the light of the Trump-Putin bromance and possibility of falling out and so on?
Sure. The United States have acted very unwisely towards Russia since the end of the Cold War. They promised they wouldn't allow NATO forces to come right up to the western borders of Russia as it was then reconstituted, but they did. Putin is a man the Russians needed. They wanted a strong leader who could reconstruct their military forces. But I think Putin has been given a bum rap in many respects. There's such an outrage against him in the British press. And there's still a great deal to be analysed and considered about these so-called chemical attacks on Russians in Britain.
And
the jury is still out. I don't think Putin represents an expansionary threat, as I think John, the previous speaker, said they'll send battleships down into the South China Sea. Well, let them, it's open waters, but I don't see Russia wanting to take over more territory. In fact, there's a deal going on between Shinzo Abe and Japan over Habomai, Shikotan, Eterofu and Kunishiri, the 4 islands in the Kurils that Japan relinquished to the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War. The Russians seem to be saying we might give them back. I think the Russians have to be dealt with as a mature, sophisticated country with a huge amount to give. And it's good to see them getting on with China. I don't mind that at all.
Yes. I always have to wait till the end. So ostensibly, not a decline in military power, but an implied decline in moral fibre. There's a moral decline, and perhaps a constitutional decline as well. We seem to be having a problem with the First Amendment, and there I'm thinking about an Australian citizen in an embassy in London who was publishing a lot of truthful information, and I feel that the Americans, in fact this is Daniel Ellsberg's theory, by calling WikiLeaks a hostile non-state intelligence service, there is an attempt to bypass the First Amendment and thus open the gates to prosecuting journalists anywhere in the world under the NDAA. We already had the loss of Posse Comitatus back in 2012. Yeah. So are we getting this erosion, a legal and constitutional erosion, a crisis of truth as well, because there is too much privacy, too many firewalls. So in fact, even I just watched, sorry, this is a plug as well, Robert Connolly's Deep State series. And Robert Connolly is a great Australian director who directed Underground, the story of the young Julian Assange. So that is a story, essentially a very cynical one, about bomb and build. The whole idea of bombing countries and then selling them construction works to build up their country again. So they're on Iran for most of the series, and then they go, oh, we've got a shortfall at the end because it didn't work. So are we having this kind of crisis, a crisis of truth, a moral crisis, and a constitutional crisis? And what can Australia and the rest of the world do to say now to America on those intellectual foundations?
Kathy, I don't think it's a crisis that's just come up. I think it's been with us for a long time. I think the military-industrial complex, that was Eisenhower's expression for the weapons industry in America, has, as you say, been profiteering from conflict and in many respects engineering the conflict that it can profit from. When you go into Canberra Airport, you see great big signs as you get into that big new airport for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, BAE, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. You realise that this is alive and well, what's going on. When you hear former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull talk about we're going to establish a weapons industry in Australia, $10 billion industry, It's all part of the United States system, and you've got, these will be agents of the United States. So yes, I share your view that there has been a good deal of interference in foreign affairs by the military-industrial complex, not only the United States, but that of Russia and France and Britain, particularly Britain. It's not just America, but certainly it's happening and it's something we have to live with. But it's not a new crisis. It's been going on for some time. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much.